The gas station fluorescent lights hummed like angry wasps in the thick summer night. Sarah Martinez stood at pump number 3, her hands trembling as she gripped the fuel nozzle, pretending to focus on the numbers climbing on the digital display. But her eyes kept darting to the side mirrors of her beat-up Honda Civic, watching, waiting, dreading. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. There he was again. The same black pickup truck parked across the street under a broken streetlight, engine running, headlights off. The same silhouette behind the wheel that had haunted her for the past 6 months. Derek Sullivan, her ex-boyfriend. The man who couldn't accept that no meant no. If you believe that sometimes angels wear leather instead of wings, that brotherhood runs deeper than blood, and that the most unlikely protectors can emerge from the darkness when evil threatens the innocent, then pause right now. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and tell us in the comments below where you're watching from tonight. Because what you're about to witness will restore your faith in humanity and show you that sometimes the cavalry comes riding Harley Davidsons. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as the pickup truck's door opened. Derek stepped out, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the empty street. Even from 50 yards away, she could feel his eyes on her, could sense that familiar rage simmering beneath his fake smile. She fumbled with her phone, her fingers shaking as she tried to unlock it. The police. She should call the police. But what would she tell them? That he was following her again? That he was watching her from a public street? They'd already told her twice that unless he actually did something, unless he physically threatened her or trespassed on her property, their hands were tied. The gas pump clicked off. Empty. Just like the hollow promises of protection she'd received from a system that seemed designed to fail women like her. Sarah replaced the nozzle with mechanical precision, her training as a pediatric nurse kicking in. Keep calm. Follow procedure. Don't let the fear show. But inside, her heart was hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate to escape. She climbed back into her car, turned the key, and pulled out of the gas station, checking her rearview mirror every few seconds. The black pickup truck followed at a distance, just like it had for 183 days. She'd been counting. Every morning when she left for work at Children's Hospital. Every evening when she drove home to her small duplex on Maple Street. Every time she went grocery shopping. Every time she visited her sister. Every time she tried to live a normal life. Derek was there, watching, waiting, reminding her that he still considered her his property. 27-year-old Sarah Martinez had never imagined her life would become a prison of fear. Growing up in a loving Mexican-American family, she'd been raised to believe in hard work, compassion, and the fundamental goodness of people. Her parents, who had immigrated from Guadalajara 30 years ago, had sacrificed everything to give their children opportunities they'd never had. Sarah had graduated nursing school with honors, landed her dream job caring for sick children, and bought her first home, a modest 2-bedroom duplex with a small garden where she grew tomatoes and herbs that reminded her of her grandmother's cooking. She'd met Derek Sullivan at a hospital fundraising event 18 months ago. He was handsome, charming, successful, a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company who drove an expensive truck and wore suits that cost more than Sarah made in a month. At first, he'd seemed perfect. Flowers every week, expensive dinners, weekend trips to the mountains. He listened when she talked about her patients, seemed to understand her passion for healing, her dreams of maybe opening a clinic in her old neighborhood someday. But the charm had been a mask. Slowly, gradually, Derek began to reveal his true nature. The flowers came with notes about how she should wear her hair. The expensive dinners came with lectures about how she embarrassed him by talking to the waitstaff in Spanish. The weekend trips became isolated retreats where he monitored her phone calls and questioned every text message. When she tried to spend time with her family, he'd create emergencies that required her immediate attention. When she worked late shifts at the hospital, he'd show up unannounced, claiming he was worried about her safety while interrogating her about which doctor she'd spoken to that day. The breaking point had come 8 months ago. Sarah had discovered that Derek had been secretly going through her mail, her phone, even her laptop. When she confronted him, his mask had finally slipped completely. He grabbed her wrist so hard it left bruises, pinned her against the kitchen wall, and whispered in her ear with a voice like cold steel. "You belong to me, Sarah. You'll always belong to me. If I can't have you, nobody can." That night, while Derek slept, Sarah had packed a single suitcase and disappeared. She'd moved to a new apartment across town, changed her phone number, blocked him on all social media, and filed a restraining order. For 2 weeks, she dared to hope that it was over, that Derek would accept reality and move on with his life. She'd been naively optimistic. The stalking had started small, a glimpse of his truck in the hospital parking lot, flowers delivered to her apartment with no return address, friend requests on social media from fake profiles that looked suspiciously like Derek's handiwork. But gradually, it escalated. He learned her schedule, her routes, her habits. He discovered where she shopped, where she got her car serviced, where she went to church. The restraining order became just another piece of paper that Derek ignored with impunity. Sarah had tried everything. She'd reported each violation to the police, documented every sighting, every unwanted contact. But Derek was clever. He never got close enough to be arrested, never made explicit threats that could be proven in court. He stayed just within the boundaries of legal ambiguity while making it clear that he was always watching, always waiting. The police were sympathetic but powerless. "We understand your frustration, Miss Martinez," Detective Riley had told her just last week. "But until he actually does something actionable, threatens you directly, damages your property, attempts physical contact, we can't arrest him for being in public places. It's his constitutional right to drive on public roads." Constitutional rights. Sarah had started to hate that phrase. What about her constitutional right to feel safe? To live without fear? To leave her house without checking for black pickup trucks lurking in the shadows? Tonight felt different. As Sarah drove through the quiet residential streets toward her duplex, she noticed that Derek was following closer than usual. Bold, aggressive. When she turned onto Maple Street, instead of parking across the street like he usually did, he pulled right into her driveway behind her, blocking her exit. Sarah's hands froze on the steering wheel. This was new. This was escalation. Through her rearview mirror, she watched Derek get out of his truck and start walking toward her car, his face twisted with an expression she'd never seen before. Something had changed. Something had snapped. She fumbled for her phone, but Derek was already at her driver's side window, tapping on the glass with his knuckles. "Sarah," he called, his voice muffled but audible. "We need to talk. Open the door." "Go away, Derek," she shouted through the closed window. "You're violating the restraining order. That piece of paper doesn't mean anything." Derek's voice was rising, taking on that dangerous edge she remembered from their last night together. "You can't just throw away what we had. You can't just pretend I don't exist." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah's neighbor, Mrs. Chin, was elderly and partially deaf. The house on the other side was empty. A for rent sign had been in the yard for 2 months. Sarah was alone, trapped in her own driveway, with nowhere to run and no one to help. That's when she heard it. The low rumble of motorcycle engines approaching from the distance, getting closer, getting louder. Derek heard it too. He looked up from Sarah's window, his face twisting with annoyance as 3 motorcycles turned onto Maple Street. Big bikes, loud pipes, black leather and chrome gleaming under the streetlights. The lead rider was a mountain of a man, easily 6'4" and built like a linebacker. His leather vest bore patches that told a story: Hell's Angels, Sergeant-at-Arms, California. His name was Marcus Tank Rodriguez, and he'd been riding these streets for over 20 years. Behind him rode 2 younger members of the charter, Tommy Ghost Williams and David Wrench Patterson. They weren't looking for trouble. They were just heading home from a late-night meeting at the clubhouse, taking the scenic route through the residential neighborhoods, because it was a beautiful night for riding and the main highways were crawling with state troopers running speed traps. But when Tank saw a woman trapped in her car by an aggressive man who was clearly not taking no for an answer, his protective instincts kicked in. You don't ride with the Hells Angels for 2 decades without developing a sixth sense for predators. And Derek Sullivan had predator written all over him. Tank signaled to his brothers and pulled his bike to a stop at the curb. The 3 Harleys lined up like armored cavalry, engines rumbling with barely contained power. Tank climbed off his bike slowly, deliberately, his boots hitting the pavement with authority. "Evening, folks," Tank called out, his voice carrying the kind of calm confidence that comes from never having to prove how dangerous you are. "Everything all right here?" Derek straightened up, puffing out his chest in the universal male display of territorial aggression. "This is none of your business, biker. This is between me and my girlfriend." "Ex-girlfriend," Sarah called out from inside her car. "And there's a restraining order." Tank's expression didn't change, but something cold and deadly entered his eyes. In his 23 years with the Hells Angels, he'd seen plenty of men like Derek Sullivan, cowards who picked on women because they were too weak to face real opposition. Men who mistook control for strength, possession for love. "Here's how this is going to work," Tank said, taking a step closer to Derek. "The lady asked you to leave. The lady has a restraining order. You're going to get in your truck, drive away, and never come back. And if you're smart, you'll pretend this neighborhood doesn't exist." Derek laughed, but it sounded forced, nervous. "Are you threatening me? I'll call the cops. I'll tell them you're—" "Go ahead," Tank interrupted, pulling out his own phone. "I've got Detective Riley on speed dial. Good man. Old friend of the club. He'd love to hear about a domestic violence situation in progress." Tank's thumb hovered over the call button. "Or you can leave now, and we can all pretend this never happened." Sarah watched the confrontation through her windshield, hardly daring to breathe. Derek was bigger than her, stronger than her, had terrorized her for months. But standing next to Tank, he looked small, insignificant. Like the pathetic bully he'd always been, underneath the expensive clothes and fake charm. "This isn't over," Derek snarled. But he was already backing toward his truck. "You can't protect her forever." Tank smiled, and it wasn't a friendly expression. "Try me." Derek climbed into his pickup truck, slammed the door, and peeled out of the driveway with a squeal of tires and a cloud of burnt rubber. Tank watched until the tail lights disappeared around the corner, then walked over to Sarah's car. She rolled down her window slowly, her hands still shaking from adrenaline and relief. "You okay, miss?" Tank asked, his voice gentler now, like a father talking to a frightened child. Sarah nodded, though tears were starting to stream down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't know what to do. He's been following me for months, and the police can't. They say they can't." "I understand," Tank said. "More than you know. What's your name?" "Sarah. Sarah Martinez." "I'm Tank. These are my brothers, Ghost and Wrench." The 2 younger bikers had approached and were flanking Tank like guardian angels in leather. "You live here?" "Yes. This is my house." Sarah gestured toward the duplex. "I'm sorry you had to get involved. I know you probably have somewhere to be." Tank shook his head. "No place more important than here. Listen, Sarah. Men like that don't give up easy. He's going to be back, probably angrier than before. You got family? Somewhere else you can stay?" Sarah's face fell. "My parents live in Phoenix now. My sister's in college. I can't just. This is my home. My job is here. My whole life is here." Tank nodded thoughtfully. "What if I told you there was another way? What if I told you that you don't have to run, don't have to hide, don't have to live in fear anymore?" "I don't understand." Tank looked at Ghost and Wrench, some kind of silent communication passing between them. Then he turned back to Sarah. "Give me your phone number," he said. "If that piece of garbage shows up again, day or night, doesn't matter when, you text me one word. Help. Can you remember that?" Sarah nodded, still not quite believing this was happening. "But why? Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Tank's expression softened, and for a moment, the hardened biker facade slipped away, revealing something deeper underneath. Pain. Loss. old wounds that had never quite healed. I had a sister once, he said quietly. Lisa, she was about your age. Beautiful, smart, kind-hearted. She worked as a teacher, loved kids, wanted to change the world. Tank paused, his jaw tightening. She had a boyfriend who wouldn't take no for an answer either. Police couldn't help her. Restraining order was just paper. We were young then, didn't know what we know now about how to handle situations like that. Sarah felt her heart breaking as she saw where this story was going. Found her in her apartment 3 days before Christmas. Tank continued. He'd broken in through the back door. Beat her too. Death with a baseball bat, then shot himself. Murder-suicide, they called it. Like that made it sound less evil. Ghost and Wrench stood silently behind their sergeant-at-arms, their faces grim. They'd heard this story before, knew how it had shaped Tank into the man he'd become. That was 15 years ago, Tank said. And I made myself a promise that night at Lisa's funeral. No woman would ever die alone and afraid on my watch, not if I could prevent it. Not while I still had breath in my body and brothers who'd ride with me. Sarah was crying openly now, overwhelmed by the tragedy of Tank's loss and the incredible gift he was offering her. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry about your sister. Don't be sorry, Tank said firmly. Be smart, be strong. And remember, you're not alone anymore. You've got angels watching over you now. For 3 days, Sarah's life returned to something resembling normal. She went to work at the hospital, cared for her young patients, drove home without seeing Derek's black pickup truck lurking in the shadows. Maybe Tank's intervention had worked. Maybe Derek had finally gotten the message and moved on with his life. She should have known better. Thursday evening, Sarah was working a late shift in the pediatric ICU when her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Enjoyed watching you through the window last night. You look beautiful when you sleep. Her blood ran cold. Derek had been in her backyard, looking through her bedroom window while she slept. How long had he been watching? What else had he seen? What was he planning? Sarah immediately forwarded the message to Detective Riley, but she already knew what he'd tell her. Anonymous text from an untraceable number. No explicit threat. Impossible to prove it came from Derek. Her word against his if it ever went to court. But she also remembered Tank's instructions. One word. Help. Her fingers trembling, Sarah typed the message and hit send. Tanks. Response came back within 30 seconds. Address? Sarah sent her home address, then sat in the hospital break room, trying to focus on her breathing exercises while her mind raced with possibilities. What was Tank going to do? Would he just talk to Derek again? Would it be enough? 20 minutes later, her phone rang. Tank's voice was calm but deadly serious. Sarah, listen to me carefully. Do not go home tonight. Do you have somewhere safe you can stay? Yes, I can stay with my friend Maria. But why? What's wrong? Ghost and Wrench are watching your house. Your ex-boyfriend isn't just stalking you anymore. He's escalating. They've seen him circle the block 6 times in the last hour. Park across the street, get out and walk around your property. He tried the back door twice. Sarah felt the room spinning around her. Oh God. Oh God. He's really going to. Hey, Sarah. Look at me. Tank's voice cut through her panic like an anchor in a storm. You're safe. You hear me? You are safe. But we need to handle this properly. This ends tomorrow night. What do you mean? I'm making some phone calls. Calling in some favors. Tomorrow is Friday, right? You get off work at 6? Yes. Good. I want you to drive straight home like normal. Park in your driveway like normal. Go inside like normal. But I want you to text me the moment you're inside with the doors locked. Tank, I'm scared. What if he won't get within 100 yards of you? Trust me. Something in Tank's voice. A certainty that went beyond confidence into the realm of absolute conviction made Sarah believe him. She'd seen Derek back down from one Hell's Angel. She couldn't imagine him standing up to whatever Tank was planning. Okay, she whispered. I trust you. Friday afternoon, Tank Rodriguez sat in the Hells Angels clubhouse, a converted warehouse on the industrial side of town, making the most important phone calls of his life. Around him, The familiar chaos of brotherhood, hummed with activity, bikes being repaired, beer being shared, war stories being told, bonds being strengthened. But Tank's focus was laser-sharp as he scrolled through his contact list, calling in 23 years' worth of favors from Hell's Angels charters across 3 states. Roadkill? It's Tank. Yeah, I know it's short notice. Listen, I need bodies. Tonight. Domestic violence situation. Yeah, like Lisa. No, this one's still alive, and I plan to keep it that way. How many can you bring? Phone call after phone call. Charter after charter. San Bernardino. Riverside. Ventura. Oakland. Fresno. Even as far away as Vegas and Phoenix. The word spread through the Hells Angels network like wildfire. Tank Rodriguez was calling in his markers, and it was personal. In the mythology of motorcycle clubs, there are legends about rides that become the stuff of history. Massive gatherings where hundreds of bikers converge for causes greater than themselves. Charity runs for sick children. Memorial rides for fallen brothers. Protests against unjust laws. But this was different. This was about one woman who'd had the courage to whisper, "He won't stop following me," to the right person at the right moment. This was about a promise Tank had made to his dead sister 15 years ago. By 5 o'clock Friday evening, the parking lot of the Hells Angels clubhouse looked like a scene from an apocalyptic movie. Row after row of Harley-Davidsons gleamed in the setting sun. Leather-clad figures moved through the crowd like a dark army preparing for war. The air thrummed with the low rumble of hundreds of motorcycle engines warming up. Tank stood on the clubhouse steps, addressing the assembled brotherhood. His voice carried clearly over the mechanical symphony. "Brothers," he began, his words cutting through the noise like a sword through silk. "Tonight, we ride for something bigger than ourselves. Tonight, we ride for every woman who's ever been afraid to go home. Every daughter, sister, mother who's ever been terrorized by a man too weak to accept rejection." A roar of approval went up from the crowd. These were men who understood violence, who'd lived hard lives and made difficult choices. But they also understood protection. They understood that true strength meant standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. "We ride legal," Tank continued. "We ride smart. We ride together. And when we're done, one predator will understand that some women have guardian angels who ride Harleys." Another roar, louder this time. Engines began to rev and chrome gleamed. Leather creaked. 400 Hells Angels prepared to send a message that would echo through the darkness for years to come. Tank climbed onto his bike, a custom-built Harley that had carried him through 2 decades of brotherhood and brotherhood's obligations. He looked around at the sea of faces, each one representing loyalty, courage, and unbreakable bonds forged in fire and steel. "Let's ride," he said. Sarah Martinez pulled into her driveway at exactly 6:17 p.m. Her hands steady on the steering wheel despite the butterflies performing aerial acrobatics in her stomach. The neighborhood looked peaceful, normal. Children playing in distant yards, lawn mowers humming. The familiar sounds of suburban Friday evening life. But she knew Derek was out there somewhere, watching, waiting for his opportunity to escalate from stalking to something much worse. The anonymous text messages had continued throughout the day, each one more disturbing than the last. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Hope you're ready for a long conversation. Time to come home where you belong." Sarah parked, gathered her purse and work bag, and walked to her front door with forced casualness. Once inside, she locked the deadbolt, drew the curtains, and immediately texted, "Tank, I'm home." Doors locked. His response was immediate. "Perfect. Stay away from windows. What you're about to hear will sound like the end of the world. It's not. It's justice." Sarah barely had time to process the cryptic message before she heard it. A sound that started as a distant whisper, like wind through trees, then grew steadily louder. A rumbling, thrumming, mechanical heartbeat that seemed to shake the very foundations of her house. Motorcycles. Not just one or two. Dozens. Hundreds. Sarah crept to her front window and carefully lifted one corner of the curtain. What she saw took her breath away. They came like a river of chrome and leather flowing down Maple Street. Hell's Angels from across the state, riding in perfect formation, their headlights cutting through the gathering dusk like fallen stars. Tank rode at the front, flanked by Ghost and Wrench, leading an army of brotherhood that stretched back as far as Sarah could see. They didn't stop at her house. They surrounded it, bikes pulling into her driveway, her front yard, the street, the neighboring yards, a protective circle of metal and muscle and unwavering loyalty that formed a barrier between Sarah and anyone who might wish her harm. The sound was overwhelming, 400 Harley-Davidson engines idling in perfect mechanical harmony, creating a wall of noise that could be heard for miles. Neighbors emerged from their houses, cell phones recording, faces filled with amazement and not a little fear. But none of the bikers paid them any attention. Their focus was absolute, their purpose clear. Sarah watched through her window as Tank climbed off his bike and walked toward her front door, but he wasn't alone. Behind him came a procession of Hell's Angels. Officers, presidents, vice presidents, sergeants at arms from charters across 3 states. Men who commanded respect wherever they rode, who'd answered Tank's call because brotherhood meant never riding alone. Tank knocked on Sarah's door, 3 gentle raps that somehow managed to be audible over the symphony of engines outside. "It's Tank," he called. "You can open up. You're safe." Sarah unlocked the door and stepped onto her front porch, immediately overwhelmed by the scene before her. 400 bikers, their leather vests displaying patches and colors that told stories of loyalty and sacrifice stretching back generations. Men who'd served in Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, men who'd built businesses, raised families, lost brothers, survived tragedies that would have broken lesser souls. And they were all here for her. A pediatric nurse who'd never done anything more dangerous than tend to sick children and try to live a quiet life. "I don't understand," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "This is too much. I can't let you do this for me." Tank smiled. And in that expression, Sarah saw not the dangerous biker the world feared, but the big brother who'd failed to save his sister and spent 15 years trying to make amends. "You're not letting us do anything," Tank said gently. "This is what we do. This is who we are. And besides," he added, gesturing toward the assembled brotherhood, "we're not here for you. We're here for all the women who never got the protection they deserved. You're just the one we can actually help." Derek Sullivan had been parked 3 blocks away, watching Sarah's house through binoculars, waiting for full darkness before making his move. He'd rented a storage unit that morning and filled it with rope, duct tape, plastic sheeting, everything he'd need to teach Sarah the final lesson about who really controlled her life. The restraining order was a joke. The police were useless. But Derek had patience. He'd wait until she was asleep, break in through the back door he'd already loosened the latch on, and then Sarah would learn what happened to women who tried to leave Derek Sullivan. He was so focused on his surveillance that he didn't notice the first motorcycles until they were already turning onto Maple Street. At first, he assumed it was just a coincidence. A few bikers taking an evening ride through the neighborhood. But they kept coming, and coming, and coming. Derek watched in growing horror as hundreds of Hell's Angels converged on Sarah's house like a military operation. Within minutes, her entire block was transformed into something that looked like a scene from a war movie. Leather-clad figures stationed at every corner, every escape route, every angle of approach. And they weren't just standing guard, they were watching him. Derek's hands shook as he lowered the binoculars and saw 3 Hell's Angels walking directly toward his hiding spot. Big men. Serious men. Men who moved with the confidence of people who'd never met a problem they couldn't solve with violence. The lead biker knocked on Derek's passenger window with a gold ring that caught the streetlight. When Derek didn't respond immediately, the man tried the door handle. Unlocked. "Evening, Derek," the biker said, sliding into the passenger seat like he'd been invited. His patches read Oakland Charter and Road Captain. His smile was friendly in the way that shark smiles are friendly. "Name's Diesel. We need to talk." Derek's mouth was dry as sand. "I don't know what you're talking about. I was just stalking Sarah Martinez," Diesel interrupted. "Planning to break into her house tonight. probably planning to hurt her, maybe planning to kill her. Diesel's voice remained conversational, almost cheerful. See, the thing is, Derek, Sarah's under our protection now. And when you threaten someone under Hell's Angels protection, you threaten all of us. I wasn't. I wasn't going to. Diesel held up a hand. Stop. Don't lie to me. We found your storage unit. Rope, tape, plastic sheeting, shovels. Either you're planning the world's most elaborate art project, or you're planning to commit murder. Derek's world tilted sideways. How had they found his storage unit? How did they know his name? How long had they been watching him? Here's what's going to happen, Diesel continued in that same friendly tone. You're going to drive to the police station right now. You're going to confess to violating the restraining order. You're going to tell them about the storage unit, the stalking, all of it. You're going to plead guilty to whatever charges they want to file. And if I don't? Diesel's smile widened. You ever seen 400 Hell's Angels angry at the same time? It's not pretty. But don't worry. You probably wouldn't live long enough to appreciate the artistry. Derek looked through his windshield at the scene on Maple Street. Hundreds of bikers, their bikes arranged in perfect formation, their attention focused entirely on Sarah's house, on protecting her, on making sure men like Derek understood that some lines could never be crossed. I'll go to prison, Derek whispered. Maybe, probably not for long if you cooperate. But here's the thing, Derek. Prison's safer than the alternative. Because if you ever come near Sarah again, if you ever contact her, if you ever even think about her, we'll know. And next time, there won't be any conversation about police stations or plea bargains. Derek started his truck with hands that shook like autumn leaves. In his rearview mirror, he could see the Hell's Angels watching him drive away, their presence a promise and a threat that would follow him for the rest of his life. 3 hours later, the rumble of 400 motorcycles had faded into the distance, leaving Maple Street quiet except for the normal sounds of suburban evening life. Sarah stood on her front porch, still trying to process what she'd witnessed. Tank had stayed behind, along with Ghost and Wrench, to make sure Sarah understood what came next. Derek turned himself in, Tank reported, checking his phone. Full confession. Violation of restraining order. Stalking. Possession of burglary tools with intent to commit assault. He'll probably plea bargain down to 18 months, be out in 12 with good behavior. And then, Sarah asked, and then he'll remember what happened tonight. He'll remember that you've got 400 guardian angels who take protection very seriously. He'll move to another state, change his name, pretend you never existed. Sarah nodded, but she could see the concern in Tank's eyes. But you're worried he might not stay gone. I'm worried about the next Derek Sullivan, Tank said honestly. Because there's always a next one. Always another predator who thinks women are property, who thinks fear is love, who thinks violence is control. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the incredible thing that had just happened. 400 strangers had dropped everything to protect her, a woman they'd never met. They'd risked arrest, risked confrontation, risked their own safety to make sure she could sleep peacefully in her own home. What can I do? She asked finally. How can I ever repay something like this? Tank smiled, and this time it was warm, genuine, the expression of a man who'd finally found a way to honor his sister's memory. You live, he said simply. You live without fear. You go to work, take care of your patients, grow your garden, visit your family. You live the life that Derek Sullivan tried to steal from you. And if I meet other women in situations like mine, you give them my number, Tank said. You tell them they don't have to be afraid. You tell them that sometimes angels wear leather and ride Harleys. Sarah Martinez stood in the parking lot of Children's Hospital, her shift finally over after a long day in the pediatric ICU. It was nearly midnight, and the lot was mostly empty, except for a few cars belonging to night shift staff. 6 months ago, walking to her car alone at this hour would have filled her with anxiety, her eyes constantly scanning for threats, her keys clutched like weapons. But tonight, she walked with confidence. Because parked under the streetlight near her Honda Civic were two familiar motorcycles, Ghost and Wrench, taking their turn at what had become an informal rotation among Tank's brothers, making sure Sarah never walked alone, making sure she always had protection. The bikers nodded as she approached her car. No words needed, just the quiet acknowledgement between protectors and protected, between people who understood that safety was a gift that should never be taken for granted. As Sarah drove home through the quiet streets, she thought about the letter she'd received that morning from the district attorney's office. Derek Sullivan had accepted a plea bargain, 2 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation with no contact orders. When he was released, he'd be forbidden from coming within 50 miles of her city. But more importantly, she thought about the women who'd reached out to her over the past 6 months. Women who'd heard her story through social media, through word of mouth, through the network of survivors who understood that sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected sources. Maria Santos, whose abusive husband had left town after receiving a visit from Tank and 3 other Hells Angels. Jennifer Walsh, whose stalker ex-boyfriend had suddenly developed an intense interest in relocating to Florida after encountering Ghost and Wrench outside his workplace. Amanda Torres, whose violent ex-fiancé had voluntarily entered an anger management program after Tank explained the alternatives in terms that left no room for misinterpretation. Sarah had become something she'd never expected, a conduit between vulnerable women and the brotherhood of bikers who'd made protecting them their mission. Her phone number was passed along through whispered conversations in hospital break rooms, through support groups, through the underground network of women who understood that sometimes the system failed and you needed guardian angels who answered to a higher law. As she pulled into her driveway, Sarah noticed the small American flag that Tank had given her, flying from a pole in her front yard. Not just a symbol of patriotism, but a signal to anyone who might be watching that this house was under the protection of people who took their oaths seriously. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Tank. "Everything quiet tonight?" Sarah smiled as she typed back. "All good. Thank you for everything." "Thank my sister," came the reply. "She's the one who taught me that protecting people is what makes us human." Sarah climbed out of her car and looked up at the stars, visible through the clear night sky. Somewhere out there, Lisa Rodriguez was resting in peace, knowing that her death hadn't been in vain, that her brother had found a way to turn tragedy into purpose, loss into protection, grief into grace. And somewhere else out there, 400 Hells Angels were going about their lives, working jobs, raising families, living as ordinary citizens. But they all carried Tank's number in their phones, ready to drop everything if another Sarah Martinez needed protection. Ready to remind the world that sometimes angels wear leather instead of wings, and sometimes salvation comes roaring down the highway on Harley-Davidson motorcycles. Sarah unlocked her front door and stepped inside her home, truly her sanctuary now, protected not by locks or alarms, but by the unbreakable bonds of brotherhood and the simple truth that some people still believe protecting the innocent was worth any risk. As she turned off the lights and headed to bed, Sarah whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude for the moment when desperation had given her the courage to whisper 4 words to a stranger. "He won't stop following me." Those words had changed everything, not just for her, but for every woman who would come after her. Because now they all knew that somewhere in the darkness, guardian angels were riding through the night, their engines rumbling like thunder, their loyalty unshakable as stone. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that heroes still exist in this world, that courage can come from the most unlikely places, and that sometimes the scariest looking people are actually the gentlest protectors, then please like this video, share it with someone who needs to believe in guardian angels, and subscribe to this channel. Tell us in the comments below, do you believe that real brotherhood still exists? Have you ever experienced unexpected protection from a stranger? Because sometimes, the people the world fears most are exactly the ones who'll risk everything to keep you safe. And remember, if you ever find yourself whispering, "He won't stop following me," to someone who looks like they could be dangerous, you might just be talking to an angel who's been waiting his whole life to earn his wings. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.